Every show builds a world around itself. Some are very commonplace, some are, well, pretty far out there. In the Orville's case, it had an advantage. It started with Trek. Welcome to the heart of the stories we tell. My name is Rob, and tonight I will be reviewing The Orville Season 1 and all the world building they did. Now, what do I mean when I say world building? I don't mean physically they built a world. I mean mentally they did. In our heads, we have an idea right now, as we sit here, the world around the Orville itself. Not just the ship, but how the society works, how multiple societies work. And yeah, Season 2, I expect we're going to get a lot more of this. But before that, let's just quickly go over what we do know. And before I get started, I do want to say I'm a bit of a fanboy. My rating system only has, for all intents and purposes, 5 middle ratings, and this is the top of them. It is almost mythical in how great it is. And all of that information is because of this guy. Seth MacFarlane created this love story to Trek. Now, normally this is about the time where I would go over all the comments from my last video. Unfortunately, now that it's off season, not as many of you are watching. So, thank you to Jovan Jeff. I am going to take your advice and split this in half. And I'm also going to use this as a lead into what I do. What I do here is I review stories as they come up, and then I also do Throwback Thursdays and theory videos every Sunday. That's very important this week. But alright, for now, if that sounds interesting, click that subscribe button, and let's unpack the world building involved in the Orville, and we won't be talking about the alien races much, just a quick overview. So once again, it's stop. Spoiler time. And like I said, they don't just start from nothing. They crib a lot of their information from Star Trek. And the first part is the fact that it's a post-scarcity society. And a lot of people don't actually think through exactly what that means. The short version is that they have a replicator technology. They can make things just out of nothingness. All they need is energy. But the long-term thought process that goes into it is a lot more complicated than you'd think. Because you have to understand, if tomorrow some brilliant genius sat there and said, hey, I can make something that rearranges the atoms of a material, so I can take rock and turn it into purified metal. All I need to do is add energy to this device. That device, in and of itself, does not make us post-scarcity. It's the first step, though, because then what it's saying is we can take raw material and instantaneously turn it into material that we can use, or even a finished product, which sounds great, right? So, okay, we have these magic boxes called replicators. But what has to go into the replicator? In Star Trek Voyager, we had an interesting conundrum where they had to have replicator rations because the material to put into the replicator wasn't going to just last forever out with no refill stations. And I want you to think about that here on Earth. What would happen? Well, we'd sit there and we'd say, hey, who is going to have those materials? And who's going to have them? Well, the rich people are. Now, in the Orville, they're not even in their private rooms, the replicators. Well, the food one is. But we saw them shopping, more or less, for clothes, and that their clothing replicator is elsewhere. So other than that replicator, we need two things to go into the replicator. We need energy, and we need material. So, let's think about this for a moment, shall we? That means on the Orville, they have an unlimited supply of power. Now, most likely this is a mixture of matter, antimatter, solar, or some other MacGuffin super material. So what about material? Well, actually the fact that they're spacefaring tells us a little bit. Think about all the material on asteroids. Think about all the material we have on other planets we could colonize. Now realize that for a true post-scarcity environment, there needs to be lots of uninhabited worlds, lots of asteroids, and lots of power to power these replicators. But even that still isn't completely post-scarcity, although that's all the building blocks for it. Because you see, humanity has to evolve a certain amount. Right now, today, if you're a millionaire, and tomorrow it's post-scarcity, you're still a millionaire. You still have things people want. And now the question is, do you want them to be able to have everything you have? And that's a pretty crazy thought process, and one I'll leave to theologians and scholars of psychology. For now, I'm just going to say that means that as much as this tagline says humanity hasn't changed, it really has. We no longer work for money. We work for prestige. We work for the fact that we want to show that we're the best there is at what we do. And you have to realize, to a certain extent, there are people that won't. There are people that are going to sit on their butts and say, well, if I can have anything I want without working, why should I work? But the good news is that means the people that are working want to work and want to excel. And I want you to think about any place you've ever worked. People that want to do the job and want to work, aren't those the better employees 9 out of 10 times? Well, we're going to see how the Orville handles that next season with our new chief. But up next, we also know something, thanks to those replicators, about what is and isn't legal, because the first officer replicates an edible bit of pot. There are recreational drug use references throughout the entire show, but you might have blinked and missed it in one of the earlier episodes when Kelly and Ed were going to visit who they thought was Ed's parents but got kidnapped. She replicates an edible brownie with pot in it in order to relax. And I want you to think about that for a second. She's a command level officer working on a ship, and they're going to let her do this. Now, there's nothing the matter with it, really. It could be legalized tomorrow in the real world. In fact, it is in several of the states of the country I live in, and several countries other than that. It's not really any more surprising than someone drinking alcohol, as long as they're not doing it on duty. But the fact that, for a big period of human history, this sort of thing was illegal, makes you realize that they've had a bit of a change in their social norms. And speaking of social norms, I don't want to get into the aliens too much, but it is acceptable for humans and aliens to mate, at least when they're capable of doing so. I don't want to think that through too much. Anyway, just the fact that human and other species, and even humans of other types are allowed to, tells you that this society is a very liberal one. Now, I realize the writers are pushing a liberal agenda with some of this, and that they're doing a pretty good job of showcasing good and bad, but I do want to just state that it is a very liberal society that they've built up, and the fact that not all of the societies are. When I talk about aliens and I talk about the different species and the way they evolved slightly differently sociologically, we're going to spend a lot of time on the krill. But there's one last human thing, and that's their version of the Prime Directive. And just as an aside, I do wonder how many alien races in the real world would have this. And maybe that's why we don't interact with them except for when they're butt probing us. But the episode in question, where it was brought up for the most part, became a whole big thing about the faith in the way civilizations evolve and the fact that they really didn't do that much damage. But even the fact that they think about it, and the fact that they have this rule, is a testament to how they're different than Star Trek. And I know what you're going to say, didn't I just start this by saying they're the same because they have a Prime Directive? But I want you to think about the way the ships do their missions. In Star Trek, especially Next Generation on, they've always focused on the fact that Starfleet is not a military organization. It is a scientific and exploration first, and military second. In the Orville, they're actually closer to U.S. Marshals, and maybe in reality that's how Trek handled it too. They just never admitted as much. But I'm curious what you think. Do you think that the fleet in the Orville is a military organization? Or do you think that it's a scientific exploration? Or like me, do you think it's a mix that just edges on one? And what other world-building bits of information have we come across? Little things, throwaway lines that we don't think about. Not necessarily about the aliens. That's next time. However, as I always point out, I do these Sunday theory videos. And the Sunday after Christmas, New Year's Eve, I want to do one on why science fiction is always wrong. I'll probably mention it in a technology video with the Orville as well. But for now, if you like this video, or if you're intrigued by that one that I'm telling you is coming up on New Year's Eve, click that like and share button. Help me build this community. And of course, if you haven't already, click subscribe. As it was said in the comment, we're at 82 subscribers and building. When I hit 100, I'm going to give away a free Amazon gift card to one of my loyal followers. Until then, we're going to talk about all sorts of things, but mostly right now on Thursdays, we're going to be talking about the Orville, because there's so much to unwrap. But for now, I hope you have a good night, and thank you for walking with me through the heart of the stories we tell.